20 years, my mom chose my toxic brother over me. Until he stole $20,000, vanished. She begged me for help, and then, growing up, I always knew my older brother, Derek, was the golden child. It wasn't just in the way our mother treated him. It was in everything. If Derek wanted something, he got it. If he caused a problem, someone else took the blame. He could twist any situation in his favor, cry on command, and somehow make himself the victim in every story. It didn't matter what he did. Our mother always had an excuse for his behavior. I learned early on that calling him out never worked. It only made me look jealous or overly sensitive. So, I stopped trying. Instead, I focused on building my own life. I went to college, met my husband, and built a future far away from my brother's chaos. I thought that marrying James, who was everything Derek wasn't, meant finally having a family without favoritism. I was wrong. The first time I introduced James to my mother, Margaret, she made it painfully clear who she preferred. Derek is so charismatic, she sighed after dinner, barely acknowledging James. He has such a presence. People just gravitate toward him. I ignored it, told myself it was just a passing comment. But the comparisons didn't stop. It was always about Derek. At our engagement party, she invited Derek's ex-girlfriend and seated her at our table. At my bridal shower, she asked Derek to give a toast about himself. Then, the ultimate insult. I showed up to my wedding rehearsal expecting to go over the ceremony. Instead, I found Derek standing with the groomsmen, grinning like he belonged there. What the hell is this? I hissed at my mother. Oh, honey, she said, all innocence. I thought it would be special for your brother to be a part of your big day. He's family, after all. James squeezed my hand under the table. He had learned, by then, how to read my anger. I let it slide. I told myself it wasn't worth a fight. Then came the wedding itself. Derek showed up late, winking at guests like he had some inside joke. But what really sent me over the edge was his outfit. A suit so light in color, it was barely distinguishable from white. A calculated move, designed to draw attention. Throughout the night, he made offhand comments, just loud enough for people to hear. You know, he said with a smirk, James and I actually used to hang out all the time before he met my sister. That never happened. They had met maybe twice before the engagement. But Derek had a way of planting seeds of doubt, twisting reality just enough to make people wonder. I should have put my foot down then. I should have called him out. But I didn't. Because I knew exactly what would happen. My mother would defend him. James would tell me to let it go. And Derek? He would just smirk, knowing he had one. After the wedding, things only got worse. My mother started inviting Derek over to our house without telling me. I'd come home from work expecting a quiet evening, only to find Derek lounging on my couch, drinking whiskey with James like he belonged there. What's going on? I asked James the first time it happened. He hesitated. Your mom invited him over. I didn't think it was a big deal. It was always like that. Little things, small intrusions, until suddenly he was everywhere. Then Margaret made a suggestion that floored me. Derek should move in with you two for a while, she said one evening, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I nearly choked on my wine. Are you joking? Just until he gets back on his feet. He's had a rough year. James cut in. We don't have the space, Margaret. She waved a dismissive hand. Oh, don't be silly. You have a guest room, which we use. For what? Guests? She laughed, like she had caught us in a ridiculous lie. I set my glass down with more force than necessary. It's not happening, Mom. Her expression hardened. You're so selfish, Amelia. Family helps family. Derek, lounging beside her, didn't even pretend to look embarrassed. He just sipped his drink, as if waiting for me to cave. I didn't. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, James's arm draped over me. She's never going to change, I murmured. James sighed. No, she's not. And neither was Derek. The next morning, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Can you send me $500? It's for Derek. He had an emergency. I tossed the phone onto the nightstand and groaned. James, still half asleep, murmured. What's wrong? Guess who needs money? He rubbed his face. Do not send it. I didn't. But my mother did. And not just once. Over the next few months, I found out that she had drained nearly $7,000 from her savings, bailing Derek out of whatever emergency he had fabricated that week. He promised he'd pay me back, she insisted. He never did. Then, the final straw. I went to visit her one afternoon and found her pacing the living room, looking frazzled. "What's wrong?" I asked. She hesitated. Then, in a small voice, she said, "My credit card was stolen." My stomach dropped. "Stolen?" She nodded. "Someone's been making charges at a casino. Thousands of dollars." I didn't even have to ask. We both knew who had done it. But when I looked at her, really looked, there was still that sliver of doubt in her eyes. That desperate need to believe in her golden child. "Derek told me his wallet was stolen last week," she said weakly. I exhaled sharply. "Mom, come on." She wrung her hands. I don't think he would do that to me." I stared at her, waiting. This was it. This was the moment she would finally see him for who he was. She swallowed. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. And just like that, the moment passed. I clenched my fists. Derek had stolen from her, used her, and lied to her face. And still, she was making excuses for him. I was done. I wasn't going to fight. I wasn't going to argue. I was just going to step back, and I was going to let her learn the hard way. I stopped arguing. I stopped trying to get through to her. If my mother wanted to keep Derek on a pedestal, fine. If she wanted to let him drain her bank account, lie to her face, and twist reality into whatever suited him best, fine. But I wasn't going to be a part of it anymore. I told James, no more letting him in. No more unannounced visits. No more second chances. And for a while, things were quiet. Too quiet. One evening, I came home from work, ready to collapse on the couch with a glass of wine. Instead, I walked into my kitchen to find Derek sitting at my table, sipping whiskey like he owned the place. James stood by the counter, his face tense. "What is he doing here?" I asked, dropping my bag. Derek grinned, raising his glass. "Nice to see you too, sis." I turned to James. "Your mom invited him," he muttered. I clenched my jaw. Of course she did. "We need to talk." I grabbed James by the arm and pulled him into the hallway. "I thought we agreed," I whispered. I didn't know he was coming until he showed up. What was I supposed to do? Kick him out?
Yes.
James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "He just showed up with your mom. She said they were in the neighborhood." I didn't want to start a fight. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and walked back into the kitchen. "Derek, you need to leave." He raised an eyebrow, pretending to be wounded. "What? No family bonding time?" "Get out," he sighed, pushing his chair back with an exaggerated groan. "You're always so dramatic, Amelia." As he walked past me, he leaned in and whispered, "You really should learn to be nicer to Mom. She worries about you, you know." I gritted my teeth. I wasn't falling for his mind games. Not anymore. Over the next few weeks, I ignored my mother's calls. She left voicemail after voicemail. "I don't understand why you're acting like this. Derek's your brother. You need to stop holding grudges, Amelia. It's exhausting. I raised you better than this." I deleted them all without listening past the first few seconds. Then, one night, she texted me. "Derek is in trouble. He needs your help." I rolled my eyes. Trouble? Huh? That was Derek's entire personality. I didn't reply. An hour later, she texted again. "You won't even hear him out? He's your family." Nope. 2 days later, my mother called James instead. I heard his sigh before I even saw his face. He walked into the living room, phone in hand. "It's your mom. Not my problem," I said without looking up from my book. "She says Derek is missing." I froze. "Missing?" James shrugged. "Apparently, he hasn't been home in a few days. Won't answer her calls." I stared at him for a long moment before snatching his phone out of his hand. "Mom," I said sharply. "Amelia, I don't know what to do. He's never been gone this long." I hesitated. Derek had vanished for days before. He'd disappear when he owed someone money, when he didn't want to deal with responsibilities, when he needed an escape. "Did you check the casinos?" I asked. Silence. Then, in a small voice, I didn't want to think that's where he was, But that's exactly where he was. 3 hours later, I got another text from my mother. Found him. No apology. No realization that maybe she should stop enabling him. Just those 2 words. I showed the message to James. He shook his head. She'll never learn. She will, I said. But not before it costs her everything. Weeks passed. Derek faded into the background again, his usual pattern. Then my mother called with a favor. Can you and James bring Eli over on Saturday? I'd love to spend some time with my grandson. James and I exchanged looks. We had been hesitant about leaving Eli with her, knowing how much she let Derek get away with. We'll stay for a little while, I said. Saturday came, and everything seemed fine. My mother cooed over Eli, baked cookies, acted like the picture-perfect grandmother. Then, just as James and I were getting ready to leave, her phone rang. Oh no, she gasped. I forgot. I have to run an errand. Just a quick one. That's fine. We'll stay until you're back, I said. She hesitated. Actually, maybe Derek can watch Eli for a little while? James and I both stiffened. Absolutely not, I said. Why not? He loves kids. He loves borrowing money from people who have kids, I corrected. Don't be ridiculous, Amelia. James stepped in. Margaret, we're not comfortable with that. She scoffed. Fine, but you're being unfair. We left soon after. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. 2 weeks later, I was at work when my phone rang. It was the daycare. Hi, Mrs. Parker. We were expecting Eli to be picked up an hour ago, but no one's come yet. My stomach dropped. Wait, what? My mom was supposed to pick him up. She called and said someone else was coming instead. Cold fear gripped my spine. Who? I believe his name was Derek. I didn't even let her finish before hanging up. I called my mother, my hands shaking. She answered on the first ring. Mom, where is Eli? Relax, Amelia. Derek picked him up. No, he didn't. Silence. Then, her voice wavered. He told me he did. I was already in my car, speeding toward the daycare. My mind raced through every possibility. Was Derek drunk? Hi. Had he forgotten? Had he taken my son somewhere? I called James. Eli is missing. I heard the sound of his chair scraping against the floor as he shot up. What? By the time I got to the daycare, the staff had already called the police. I ran inside, my breath short, and there he was, sitting in the corner with one of the teachers, his tiny face confused but unharmed. Derek never showed up. He had forgotten. Or worse, he had lied. I scooped Eli into my arms, my heart hammering. James arrived minutes later, his face thunderous. Where's Derek? He growled. Gone. I spat. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't just stepping back. I was cutting Derek out. Completely. Because the next time he forgot something, it might not just be a daycare pickup. And I wasn't willing to risk what happened next. After the daycare incident, I made a decision. Derek was done. No more chances. No more, but he's your brother. No more pretending. James and I sat my mother down. Derek is never watching Eli again. Ever. And if you try to let him, you won't be seeing him either. Her eyes widened. Amelia, don't be dramatic. This isn't drama, Mom. This is reality. My son is not your pawn to make Derek feel better about himself. James backed me up. You don't have to like our decision, but you will respect it. She folded her arms. You're making a mistake. No, Mom. You made the mistake. And soon, she'd realize just how deep it went. With me and James out of the picture, Derek latched onto my mother harder than ever. She started covering for him more frequently. Bills, short-term loans, emergencies. It started small, $100 here, $200 there. Then it escalated. Her grocery money? Gone. Her credit card? Maxed out. One afternoon, James came home, tossing his phone onto the counter. Your mom asked me for money. I blinked. What? She said it was just a temporary issue, he said, shaking his head. I told her no. My stomach twisted. If she was coming to James, she was running out of options. That night, I texted her, Are you okay? Her response came hours later. Fine. Just tired. I knew what that meant. Derek was bleeding her dry. One evening, James and I took Eli for a walk. The air was crisp, the leaves golden. For the first time in months, I felt peace. Then my phone buzzed. It was a cousin. Hey, weird question. Did your mom buy Derek a car? I stopped walking. What? Yeah, he posted a picture with a new SUV. Bragging about it. I called my mother immediately. Tell me you didn't buy Derek a car. Silence. Then, it's not like that, Amelia. What's it like then? Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like that. She sighed. He needed it for work. He doesn't have a job. She hesitated. That tiny moment of doubt. I wanted to push harder. I wanted to scream, wake up. But I didn't. Because I knew the only way she'd learn was the hard way. So I just said, good luck with that, and hung up. I didn't hear from her for weeks. Then, at 7 a.m. on a Saturday, my phone rang. Amelia, something's wrong. I sat up. What happened? My bank account is overdrawn. Thousands of dollars missing. Cold, sharp anger ran through me. And let me guess, Derek had nothing to do with it? She hesitated. Then, in the smallest voice, he said he just borrowed a little to cover rent. He promised to pay it back. I clenched my fist. Mom, you cannot be this naive. It's not like that. It is exactly like that. For the first time, I heard it. The wavering in her voice. The doubt. The tiny crack in the armor of denial. But she still wasn't ready. I'll talk to him, she said, as if that ever worked. I didn't argue. I just hung up. Because this time, she was on her own. A week later, my mother called again. I need you to pick up Eli today. What? Why? She exhaled shakily. I asked Derek to watch him. But I don't think he's coming. Ice flooded my veins. Mom, are you kidding me? I thought he'd show up. I was already grabbing my keys. Eli better be safe, Mom. Because if anything happens to him, I swear to God. I didn't finish. I just drove. By the time I got there, Eli was fine. But my mother? She looked hollow. I made a mistake, she whispered. Yeah, Mom. You did. I took my son and left. I wasn't going to tell her what to do. I wasn't going to beg her to see reason. I was just going to wait. Because the fall was coming. And this time, I wasn't going to stop it. After the daycare disaster, I thought my mother had finally learned. I thought she had reached her breaking point with Derek. I was wrong. She didn't cut him off. She didn't even confront him. Instead, she gave him more money. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash. I knew what was coming. I knew she was headed straight for disaster. But she wouldn't listen. So I stopped talking. I let her make her choices. And then, just like I knew it would, it all came crashing down. One evening, James and I were in the middle of dinner when my mother called. Derek is missing. I rolled my eyes. Again? She sniffled. I think something's really wrong this time. What do you want me to do about it, Mom? I just thought you'd care. I sighed. Did you check the casinos? The bars? Maybe his latest girlfriend's house? Silence. Mom, he's not missing. He's hiding. She sniffed. I just don't understand how you can be so cold toward your own brother. Because I've seen this movie before, and I already know how it ends. I hung up. Sure enough, 2 days later, she texted me. Found him. That was it. No apology. No realization. Just the same cycle repeating itself. I showed James the text. She's never going to change, he muttered. She will, I said. But not before she loses everything. Margaret started looking exhausted. More drained than usual. James noticed it before I did. She looks rough, he commented one night after she dropped off some toys for Eli. Derek is bleeding her dry. It only took a few weeks for the truth to come out. One morning, I got a frantic call from my mother. The bank just called me. Someone took out a line of credit in my name. I closed my eyes. Let me guess, Derek? She didn't answer. But that was an answer in itself. How much? I asked. Her voice wobbled. More than 20,000. I sucked in a breath. Mom, that's a crime. That's identity theft. He said he was desperate. He swore he'd pay it back. Oh, for God's sake, Mom. How many times are you going to let him ruin you? She started crying. And for the first time, I didn't comfort her. Because I was tired. Tired of playing this game. Tired of waiting for her to wake up. She wiped her nose. I'll fix it. No, Mom. You won't. But reality would. Days later, my mother called me again. Something's wrong with my bank account. I sat up. What now? Someone's been using my credit card. Hundreds of dollars in charges I don't recognize. My stomach sank. Mom, where's your card right now? Silence. Then, Derek had it last. Of course he did. She rushed to the bank, but the damage was done. Thousands of dollars spent on God knows what. She confronted Derek that night, and for the first time, she didn't just ask if he did it. She knew. And how did he react? He laughed. Then, when she didn't back down, he turned on the tears. I didn't have a choice, Mom, he sobbed. I was struggling. You don't know what it's like. And when that didn't work, he lashed out. You never actually loved me, he spat. You've always chosen Amelia over me. You're just like her, selfish and cruel. That was it. The moment it all shattered. Because my mother, the woman who had spent years defending him, finally saw him for what he was. A liar. A manipulator. A user. The next morning, she showed up at my house. She sat at my kitchen table, looking pale and hollow. I was wrong. I didn't gloat. I didn't say I told you so. I just let her sit with the weight of her own mistakes. Because finally, she was learning. Derek didn't take it well. When my mother stopped answering his calls, he started spreading lies. He told anyone who would listen that he was the real victim, that my mother had abandoned him, that I had turned her against him. And the worst part? Some relatives actually believed him. People started whispering, Margaret shouldn't have picked sides. Family is family. Maybe Amelia pressured her. I ignored them, because I didn't have to fight anymore. The truth was already unraveling, piece by piece. And then came the breaking point. A few weeks later, we had a small family gathering at my aunt's house. Just close relatives. Derek wasn't invited. He showed up anyway. He walked in like nothing had happened, smiling like he owned the place. Nobody greeted him. Nobody looked at him. So he turned on my mother. You're a cold-hearted old woman, he sneered in front of everyone. You betrayed your own son. My mother stood up, and in a voice I had never heard from her before, she said, You are no longer welcome here. Leave. He scoffed. Nobody backed him up. Nobody stood in his defense. So, for the first time in his life, Derek was well and truly alone. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. And just like that, he was gone. For the first time in years, our family felt safe. No more manipulation. No more guilt trips. No more chaos. One night, my mother sat across from me, stirring her tea. I wasted years believing in him. I didn't say anything, because I didn't need to. She finally understood. Derek was gone. No more surprise visits. No more manipulation. No more watching my mother fall for his lies. For the first time in my life, I felt free. I thought it was over. But Derek? He wasn't finished yet. Months passed in silence. No texts, no calls, nothing. Then, one evening, my mother's phone buzzed. A message from Derek. After months of radio silence, he had suddenly reappeared. But this time, he wasn't just begging for forgiveness. He was desperate. Mom, I have nowhere to go. I've lost everything. I need help. I know I messed up, but I've changed. Please, I just need a fresh start. A long-winded sob story. A plea for sympathy. A last-ditch effort to sink his claws back into her. James and I were sitting with my mother when she read the message. I saw it. The hesitation. The guilt creeping back in. The old instinct to fix things. James saw it too. You're not actually considering this, are you? He asked. She didn't answer right away. He's my son. I clenched my jaw. He's your son who stole from you, lied to you, and nearly destroyed you. That hasn't changed, Mom. She was silent for a long time. Then she muttered, I just need to think. That's when I knew Derek still had a grip on her, even after everything. But this time, I wasn't going to fight her. I was going to let her make the choice, because I knew if she let him back in, he'd ruin her all over again. Days passed. My mother hadn't responded to Derek's message. Then, out of nowhere, one of her close friends reached out. The message was simple. Be careful. Derek has been telling people he's going to get back in by playing your emotions. The first crack in the illusion. Then came the second. A cousin mentioned that Derek had sent the exact same sob story to someone else. Same words. Same promises. That person had rejected him. Suddenly, it all clicked for my mother. Derek wasn't reaching out because he had changed. He was reaching out because he had run out of people to use. That was it. For the first time, my mother saw the truth before it was too late. She picked up her phone, blocked his number, and looked at me and James. He's not my problem anymore. And just like that, the last door slammed shut. Derek didn't take it well. A few hours later, my mother got one last email. A long, rage-filled meltdown. You're a cold-hearted traitor. You've turned your back on your own son. You let Amelia poison you against me. You were supposed to be my family. Anger, guilt trips, desperation. It was his final attempt to claw his way back in. Nobody responded. For the first time, there was no dramatic family explosion. No arguments. No flying monkeys rushing to his defense. Just silence. And for Derek, silence was worse than any punishment. A few weeks later, we had another family gathering. This time, Derek wasn't even mentioned. No whispers. No sympathy. He was a ghost. Then, in the middle of dinner, my mother stood up. I want to say something. The room went quiet. I was wrong. Not just about Derek, about everything. She admitted that she had enabled him for years. That she had ignored every warning sign. That she had let her favoritism cloud her judgment. No excuses. No deflection. Just accountability. For the first time, I believed her. Because for the first time, she had chosen herself. And she had chosen me. Weeks passed. Derek had no one left to manipulate. With no one to fund his lifestyle, he started hopping from job to job, burning bridges wherever he went. Then, one day, someone sent my mother a link. Derek had resorted to begging for money online. A dramatic post about how his entire family had turned against him, how he had been abandoned for one little mistake, how he just needed a little help getting back on his feet. Nobody donated, because nobody believed him anymore. Life without Derek was peaceful. For the first time in years, we had a holiday dinner with no drama, no fights, no tension, just a normal family meal. My mother actually listened when I spoke. She showed up for Eli in ways she never had before. And then, one day, out of nowhere, she sat me down and said, I'm sorry. Not a quick sorry to smooth things over. A real, genuine apology. For the favoritism. For making me feel like I wasn't good enough. For choosing Derek over and over again, even when it was clear he was in the wrong. I never thought I'd hear those words from her, but she meant them. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to fight for her approval. I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. I was enough. Months later, Derek made one last mistake. He tried to crash another family event. He wasn't invited, but that didn't stop him from showing up. He walked in, acting like nothing had happened, like he belonged there. But this time, nobody humored him. Somebody told him to leave. When he refused, they had him escorted out. And the ultimate karma? That wealthy aunt he had been trying to manipulate? She found out everything. The lies. The group chat scandal. The credit card theft. She cut him off too. With no one left to leech off, Derek burned every last bridge. And suddenly, he wasn't just cut off from us. He was cut off from everyone. One evening, I was sitting on the porch with James, watching Eli play in the yard. For the first time in years, I felt light. No more manipulation. No more chaos. Just peace. Feels different, doesn't it? James asked. I nodded. Because I finally understood something. I never had to fight for my mother's approval. I never had to prove anything. All I had to do was step back and let the truth reveal itself. And it did. Because in the end, my mother thought Derek was the better choice. She paid the price for that mistake. Now, she finally understood why I walked away first.